Okay, hopefully everybody can hear us while we get started. I'd just like to thank everybody for being here today. My name's Dara Joyce. I'm a co-organizer of this webinar titled Election 2020, How to Drive Civic Engagement. Would like to just start by saying that I hope everyone is, staying healthy, practicing social distancing, staying safe. I know these are sort of unpredictable, uncertain times, and I hope everyone is staying safe out there. Some housekeeping things before we kind of delve into it. We'll be live tweeting about this webinar, so feel free to follow that with the hashtag election 2020. And feel free to check us out on Twitter by visiting us at @phone2action. At the end of the webinar, we'll actually have a Q&A. So in that Q&A, feel free to submit any questions. You just type that into the questions box on the control panel. And as well, if you run into any tech difficulties at all, feel free to reach out to us on the chat panel, also on the dashboard, and one of us will, address your concern. So moderating today's webinar will be Jason Langsner, and I'll sort of pass things over to Jason, and Jason will take the helm from here. So from there, thank you all for tuning in today, and I hope you find this to be a valuable hour.
And good afternoon, everybody, and good morning for those on the West Coast. My name is Jason Langsner, Senior Product Manager at Phone to Action. Just wanted to quickly go over the agenda before all of the speakers self-introduce ourselves. At first, we're going to talk about where we are in the current election calendar and specifically how this election is being impacted by the current public health crisis. We're going to have a discussion around why companies are engaging during this election, discuss prioritizing the idea of prioritizing voters and democracy over anything partisan, helping your audiences get educated and vote, as well as the conversation around who actually owns civic engagement within your company, and also who is your audience within your organization. As Darok mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and let's just dive right in. So as mentioned, my name is Jason Langsner. I have 16 years of advocacy experience. Before joining Phone to Action, I was a vice president of a technology trade association, vice president of a national business advocacy organization, and led digital strategy for an international nonprofit. At Phone to Action, I oversee our election education and get out the vote tools, as well as all the insights and analytics in the platform. So for those that have used us, if you have seen a number in the platform, it has likely gone through me or a member of my team. While we do self-introductions, I also want each of our individual speakers to finish a specific sentence, and that sentence is, the 2020 election is blank. And I'll get started with that. So for me, the 2020 election is an important opportunity to engage your employees, retirees, board of directors, business partners, customers, and other stakeholders. And with that, let me introduce Danielle.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle James. I'm the PAC manager at Caterpillar. I run our employee political engagement programs, including the PAC, grassroots, our Get Out the Vote efforts, and our facility visit initiatives. I started here in 2013 after, 20 years, I guess, of experience in campaigns and political work. I'm originally from Louisiana. You may hear that in my voice. I moved to DC for graduate school back in 1996, and then I expected to go right back home, and yet here I am. So with that, I'll answer Jason's question, or finish Jason's sentence. The 2020 election is, and I'm tempted to say, the last thing on most people's mind, because I think for a lot of our employees right now, that is just not what they're thinking about. But I think it makes it all the more important for us to be sending messages to folks and reminding them of these important dates. I don't think it's that they don't care. I think it's just that they have other things on their mind right now. So for me, the 2020 election is that opportunity to, again, kind of re-engage with our people, stay in front of them, and offer them these important services.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Danielle. And let's introduce Juliet.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Phone to Action for hosting this webinar and having me on it. And thanks to everybody who is participating today, taking the time during this chaotic global pandemic. So my name is Juliette Boberg. I'm a senior program manager at Impactual, where I manage our corporate and cultural civic engagement projects. Impactual is a nonpartisan social impact firm that helps brands, companies, nonprofits, and philanthropists address the most pressing social and political challenges of our day. We focus a lot on corporate civic engagement, both working with companies directly to help them develop and implement dynamic on-brand civic engagement programming around elections, but also with nonprofits and coalitions that are working on the other side of the equation to try to shift the culture of voting in collaboration with election administrators and groups on the ground. Just to give a little context of why I am on this panel, we started the specific part of our work in 2018 when our founder, Ashley Spillane, who formerly ran Rock the Vote, started working with companies interested in implementing Get Out the Vote initiatives around the midterm election. She recruited a group of these companies, including Twitter, Snapchat, WME, Target, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota, Spotify, Gap, and Patagonia, to participate in a case study examining how each of them launched their own nonpartisan civic engagement initiatives, highlighting best practices in corporate civic engagement programming and making the business case for more companies to get involved in this work in the lead up to 2020. She was a Harvard fellow at the time and partnered with another fellow, Sophia Gross from Snapchat, to write this case study, which was released last June. I'll be talking later in this presentation a lot about the key findings and best practices coming out of this study, but I just wanted to say that I'm so excited that you all took the time to participate in this webinar today. To answer Jason's question, the 2020 election is going to be unprecedented in so many ways, but I really feel like companies have the ability to make a huge impact on voter turnout, especially this year. With this unnavigated territory of having a global pandemic on our hands, consumers and employees are going to need a lot of help navigating the confusing and swiftly shifting electoral landscape in the lead up to November 3rd. And I think companies are uniquely equipped to help keep people educated and excited to ensure their ballot is cast this year. So thank you all for joining, and really excited to hear your thoughts on the subject.
Thank you so much, Juliette. And I'll just definitely say that report from the Harvard Kennedy School Ash Center is definitely required reading for any organization considering doing voter engagement or civic engagement around this election. So we'd be happy to share the link with everyone that's here in attendance as well. And let's also introduce Dan O'Brien.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan O'Brien. Thank you all for joining the webinar today, hosted by Phone to Action. I'm very excited to participate along with the other panelists. Just a quick background, I'm the Senior Manager of Government Relations at Fidelity Investments. I've been there for a little over 2 years. My focus is on political engagement, and I help manage the Political Action Committee. I also head up our stakeholder relationships, both at the state and federal level, and with the administration and regulators. Finally, our focus with Get Out the Vote is to engage all of our eligible associates who are to either register or go out and vote in a nonpartisan way. And our program, while has expanded, has been around for several election cycles, encouraging our associates to vote. And the 2020 elections is, well, Julia and Danielle summed it up pretty well. I would say in this frame of mind is evolving. We live in interesting times, and we've already seen, and we'll speak to some of the changes that have happened in the electoral landscape that have shifted. So it's critically important to keep employees up to date on those changes and ways that they can still get involved.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan. And I'm sure everybody here has followed the news as of late, not just related to healthcare and the economic impacts of COVID-19, but certainly the political and policy impacts as well. So looking even at this past week, there have been 5 states in the last few days that have decided to postpone specific elections. So Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, and Ohio have all decided to push specific early presidential primaries until a little bit later in the election calendar. Puerto Rico had a vote on Monday where they too are looking at postponing their upcoming presidential primary. That's going through the legislature, and the governor is intending to sign that. So Puerto Rico is going to join that list of 5 states as the first territory that's going to be postponing an election. 3 states decided to move forward yesterday with their planned elections. Ohio did have a planned election yesterday, but they postponed it. But Arizona, Florida, and Illinois all moved forward. Vice President Biden swept on the Democratic presidential candidate side. But perhaps one of the other stories that came out of yesterday was in Illinois' 3rd congressional district, where Blue Dog Representative Dan Lipinski got primaried and lost his reelection bid to Mary Newman, a bit more of a progressive candidate. So we're even seeing some down ballot things happening, and certainly Illinois saw some information needing to be changed in real time as poll workers weren't showing up to locations, as polling locations weren't staffed. So they had to extend their hours yesterday based on COVID-19 with that specific elections. Maryland, as I mentioned, they postponed their election for the presidential primary, but Maryland decided to move their Maryland 7 special election, the former Elijah Cummings seat, to be a mail-in only election, and that's going to remain on April 28th. So Maryland 7 voters will continue to be voting by mail on or before April 28th for the Elijah Cummings seat, but the presidential primary has been moved. And the DNC has actually been discouraging states from postponing additional primaries, but they want to make accommodations. The DNC is promoting the idea of making sure that states have a no excuse policy for absentee and early voting, that there's greater exposure for voting by mail, and even states that are so inclined can set up drive-through voting locations where people won't even need to get out of their car to place a ballot in the upcoming election. Looking a little bit more at the forest rather than the specific trees here, we could see as well some specific questions that we've been thinking about. For instance, how organizations such as yourselves are going to adapt to the current reality on the ground, where before you may have done tabling and voter registration drives in person. You may have had candidate town halls with individuals coming to your workplaces. Perhaps those are now all going to go virtual, where you're going to have candidates doing telephone town halls or Zoom meetings with your employees, and you may be using more online tools to promote voter registration, finding your locations to vote, looking at who's on your ballot, etc. Additionally, there's already been a change for how candidates are doing retail politicking and campaigning. Yesterday, Vice President Biden's victory speech was done from his home in Delaware versus one of the 3 states that had elections yesterday. It was live streamed. Additionally, the campaigns decided to scale back and not have their large rallies where the candidates are going out and shaking hands and kissing babies, as we've always traditionally done with retail politicking. And we're actually seeing as well the impact of federal and state legislative bodies and executives making decisions that impact their communities. And those decisions are certainly going to be a political issue as they look at their re-election campaigns and what is important in the legislatures. Looking even at phone to action, yesterday we saw nearly 250,000 legislative connections, those messages that we send to US Congress and state legislative bodies through our advocates. The overwhelming majority of those came through individuals looking at commenting on policies or issues related to the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. And we see from the ACLU that they too are planning and preparing for different types of scenarios related to how voter turnout, access to the polls, and ballot processing may be impacted by the current state of affairs across the country. But with that, let's turn it over to Dan and talk a little bit more about what is this current upcoming 2020 election. Dan, are you still online with us?
Yeah, I'm just sorry, I was having a little trouble unmuting there. Yeah, so 2020 election by the numbers, as you can all see, is a pretty big election year. I mean, beyond the presidency, you've got the whole House of Representatives that's up. You know, you've got a third of the Senate, and you've got you know, almost a dozen governorships that are currently up, plus thousands of state and local officials, and several ballot initiatives that many companies might care about. which is also on the ballots in various states. Depending on where your company is and what your footprint looks like, there could be some very big elections within either your states or regions or across the country that you're going to want to inform employees about who's on the ballot, and who what potential outcomes might be. For some key dates that are going on in election dates this cycle, that, as Jason kind of alluded to, there are some shifts here potentially in the primary elections here, especially on the Democratic side. I would note that I believe the delegate counts on the Democratic side for the president need to be counted by June 20th, and primaries are supposed to be wrapped up by, I believe, June 9th. So, while states are looking to maybe shift the primaries a little later, they're typically staying within those timeframes to still wrap up the Democratic side of the presidential ticket. And the congressional primaries may be impacted as well in some of those states that are looking to move. Some other key dates to consider are obviously the Democratic and Republican national conventions. Interesting to note that in the 2016 platform of the Republican convention, they actually had a plan in place for a virtual convention that was kind of the outcome based on the 2012 convention, where there was a potential hurricane that was going to impact the convention. So on the Democratic side, it's yet to be seen, but they're looking at what that would look like if the coronavirus continues to impact both travel and large crowds heading into the summer. But it looks like those decisions probably won't be made until later. Looking towards the fall, there are some key dates if you're looking at either putting together a robust get out the vote program. You've got September 22nd, which is National Voter Registration Day. It's also Employee Voter Registration Week. And then you've got on October 24th, National Vote Early Day. And then November 3rd is Election Day. Election Day, if things continue to progress with the coronavirus the way they are, would take an act of Congress to actually move. The president can't move Election Day, so something to consider. But those are things that are kind of further down. But as people are starting to look at these deadlines and dates where you're looking to update your employees on either voter registration deadlines or primaries, you want to make sure that these things are shift. And if you have a tool like Phone to Action, you can assure that those dates are staying updated. But whatever way you want to communicate with your employees or customers, you want to make sure that that information is still relevant.
And Danielle, is there anything that you wanted to add from a Caterpillar perspective of where we are in the current election calendar and how you're looking at mobilizing your employee base?
Sure, absolutely. Let me first kind of speak to some of the dates that Dan outlined, and he talked about the conventions, and Caterpillar is really going to focus in on the conventions and work with our trade association partners, because both conventions are actually in areas where Caterpillar has a fairly significant manufacturing footprint. So able to engage our employees around the conventions, though not necessarily talking specifically about the conventions or spending money at the conventions, but because we are, again, geographically close by, we'll use that opportunity to have some get out the vote drives and some voter engagement activities at our facilities, again, in partnership with a couple of our trade associations, most specifically the National Association of Manufacturers and the Association of Equipment Manufacturers are both doing some version of a bus tour or event tour. And so we'll partner with them, which is great for me because it also ends up being a shared cost event. So I don't end up footing the bill for these activities that we like to do that become kind of, again, like an afternoon long, maybe we do a picnic and feed employees, especially our production employees, but then have get out the vote resources available and kind of activities around that in the afternoon. So we like to make those pretty big. But some dates that you don't have here, but Dan kind of touched on, Caterpillar has shifted our focus this year. Some of the last big events that we'll do will be the ones at the convention. We're really trying to front load everything, and we have started communicating a lot earlier than we typically do, understanding that a lot of the congressional primaries are really now where races are decided. So we started communicating back in January and talking about absentee ballot options and early voting and voter registration deadlines for these early primary states, because again, kind of getting back to what I said a second ago, Caterpillar's manufacturing footprint and our facility footprint across the US, we had a lot of those states where we have a large presence have these early March primaries. So we started communicating quite a bit ago, and this is a shift for us. So I don't want people to think that if they didn't do that, they're behind the curve or that they've lost the opportunity. That's definitely not the case. But I would say, you know, again, maybe it's a good chance to look really quick at what you do have going on and where your folks are, and maybe shift and go ahead and start right away, and not wait necessarily to that focus on the general election. You can start now and start talking about primaries.
And Danielle, I would just add real quick, you know, Fidelity shifted our Get Out the Vote program as well early to include all of the primaries this election cycle, and it was to your point to really educate our employees on you know, getting registered to vote, making sure your voter registration is accurate, being active in the primaries, as Danielle noted. That oftentimes picks a candidate who's going to win in the general election, especially at the, you know, the state, local, or even the House level. So it was critically important to get that information out there, and is a good service to offer your employees. But also, you know, whenever you start your program, whether it's through the primaries, you're still doing a great service for your employees or customers if you're doing an external one. Just getting the awareness for them and the information they need.
And I think it's a perfect transition, thinking about when you're looking at doing this employee engagement to why you're doing this engagement. You know, perhaps, you know, Danielle, you can jump in and share a little bit about why Caterpillar is doing this, to couple what Dan was saying about why Fidelity is doing this type of engagement.
Absolutely. So our decision, Caterpillar's decision to engage employees in the political process, is actually part of our corporate value statement. There's a whole section around engagement. We call it something else. I think we actually put it into, you know, a different header altogether that kind of talks about responsibility. But one of the things that we say is it's our responsibility as a company to be involved in the political process, and that employees should feel free to participate in public matters and political processes according to their individual beliefs. So we've been doing this for quite some time. I mentioned when I did my self-introduction that I started at CAD in 2013, but this was something that I inherited. We've tried to build on it and improve it, make it better, but this is really part of Caterpillar's DNA. And again, this whole value statement and the way it's written in is part of a bigger section on how we engage in public policy issues and why it's important for the corporation to do that. So we approach Get Out the Vote as a sort of employee benefit to assist in their engagement. So we say that employees should be participating and that we support that. And so my team is helping facilitate that engagement from our employees. Another big part of that is that we move people around a lot, which is so different for me. Coming from a political kind of campaign background, I definitely lived a little bit like a gypsy, but that was because campaigns ended every 2 years. So I had a new job every 2 years. Well, Caterpillar's not dissimilar in that, again, every 3 to 5 years, we shift people into different roles. And oftentimes that means that they have to relocate. So we offer this reminder about how to register to vote in your new community, or learn about your lawmakers, or identify your polling location. we do all of that as a reminder for folks when they've moved. So we're a resource that really complements that overall government affairs program that's, again, part of our values, and we look at it as part of this holistic kind of engagement strategy for our employees.
And I also feel that one of the benefits for organizations being involved in this employee engagement is the fact that you have a specific relationship with your employees. I've always felt that perhaps 30-second commercials aren't the best source of information to educate a potential voter on issues that may impact them, their job, their industry, their company, their home. So could you talk a little bit about the idea around the trust that companies might have and how that can be used as part of your communication strategy, Danielle?
Sure. Again, I think this is somewhere I'm really fortunate. Caterpillar enjoys kind of a somewhat unique space in the public dialogue as a trusted company. We have a strong legacy. We have a strong brand. I participated in focus groups. This has probably been 4 years ago here at CAT. And one of the focus group participants, this was in Alexandria, Virginia, here close to where I live. And that individual was asked to describe Caterpillar and maybe, relate us to something else that was familiar to him. And he compared Caterpillar to Paul Bunyan, which I just thought was great. I loved that analogy. And he just said that Caterpillar is strong and steady and that we lead the way when a situation calls for the best, which of course just made me super proud, but it also kind of gives me pause because we do enjoy this strong trust relationship, both with our employees, but I think with the world, right? Because we're a global company. So we're happy to engage our employees and engage kind of in this bigger conversation, but we're very careful where we leverage our brand in that public space and how we do that around public policy issues, especially outside those obvious issues that tie into our business with those industries that we serve. We're very cautious, and I would say we're very risk averse by our nature. So we only engage on those political and social, or engaging on those political and social issues doesn't necessarily fit our culture or our brand. And also because we aren't a B2C enterprise, we don't really have the considerations that some of the other companies, even some of my fellow panelists, the companies that they work for, they have different considerations because of their business models. So I want to hear from them, and if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of throw it over to them because our role is very different, and I'm guessing that maybe Dan would have a different way of seeing this, especially as a financial services industry.
Yeah, I mean, similar to your program, Danielle, I think, we view this as a service or a benefit to our employees, providing them nonpartisan information, to, kind of, it's like the ready, set, go formula of, here are the things you need to know. Are you prepared? And then go vote is kind of the approach that we take to, encouraging our employees to go out and vote. We're a privately held company, so we oftentimes don't take public stands on a lot of the political and social issues as well. It's more in our nature, but we want to make sure that there's respectful dialogue about the issues that folks personally care about, and want them to know that whatever their political or social beliefs are, that they have the right to go exercise their vote and do it in a respectful manner.
And Juliet, could you talk a little bit about kind of the lessons learned from the report that Ashley and Sophia were working on and the 8 companies that were engaged in that?
Yeah, so Dan and Danielle touched on this in a really great way, but one of the key takeaways of the Harvard Kennedy School case study was that corporate civic engagement work can truly be done in a nonpartisan and relatively risk-free way. as was touched on, some companies are hesitant to commit to civic responsibility programs for fear that it'll look too political, and it's definitely risky to take a side on either end of an issue or a political party. But in reality, our case study interviews and other recent polling show widespread support for nonpartisan initiatives among employees and consumers across age ranges and among members of both political parties. When companies simply encourage and help their employees and consumers to vote, empowering them to make their own voices heard, this avoids the risk of taking a stance on either side of an issue or siding with a political party. All of the companies we worked with had a mandate to ensure their efforts were nonpartisan, and all found unique and creative ways to do this. They were successful because they made it clear in their efforts that their efforts were about strengthening our democracy, not about advocating for a particular candidate or party.
I know that Caterpillar adds a disclaimer on the bottom of all their GeoTV comms. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Danielle?
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of goes back a little bit to the trust statement before, because we do enjoy that trust with employees. We want to be very careful that there's never any confusion about where we stand and what we're trying to accomplish with our Get Out the Vote messages. So we put just 2 sentences at the bottom of any of our communications around Get Out the Vote. And those 2 sentences are: the resources provided are intended to help you prepare for the elections, not to endorse specific candidate, issue, or parties. So regardless of your political affiliation, we hope you vote. So again, it's encouraging, it's a positive statement, it's consistent with our corporate values that I mentioned before, and it allows us, again, that other, kind of another opportunity to be very clear with employees that this is a benefit. It's not to steer people one way or the other. The focus is on being part of the process.
And Dan mentioned the benefit as well, the benefit to the organization, the benefit to the employer. Julia, can you talk a little bit about that part of it, the value add for any corporation or entity doing civic engagement?
Yeah, so another key takeaway of the case study is we found that companies believe civic responsibility initiatives are good for business, as Dan has already touched on. No matter the approach or time frame of their initiatives, each company cited positive benefits from these efforts, including strengthening employee relationships. Patagonia saw an influx of emails to their CEO after they provided time off to vote, saying thank you so much, like this was a total game changer. I got to bring my family to the polling sites. I'm so happy to work for this company, stuff like that. They saw that it empowered their consumers, especially Spotify, Snapchat, Twitter, saw people really engage on their platforms through their in-app voter registration pop-ups, polling location finders, hashtags that they were sharing, etc. They felt that it really built their brands and also elevated the company's reputations with elected officials, which is in certain cases very important. A recent study from Global Strategy Group showed that a really astonishing 81% of consumers are more likely to buy from brands that encourage their communities to participate in democracy, and 76% of consumers are more likely to seek employment at these brands. So people are really expecting businesses to play an active role in encouraging Americans to make their voices heard at the ballot box, and doing so can be extremely beneficial to businesses from several angles.
And earlier we talked a little bit about where we are in the current election calendar, kind of the when of election 2020. We talked about why organizations are getting involved. Julia, can you talk a little bit about how different organizations can potentially get involved?
Yeah, definitely. So another takeaway from the case study was that any amount of effort a company is willing to take, no matter how small, can make a difference as long as it's on brand. We put together this ladder of engagement in our case study to show folks the different levels that companies can engage at. You can do a one-time digital activation to help promote Election Day or National Voter Registration Day on your company social accounts, super easy, cost-free. Or you can go so far as sponsoring a party at a polling location like WME did in Nashville in 2016 with Sheryl Crow as a headliner. One example from our case study participants that was really on brand and showed really wonderful results was Snapchat. Snapchat has a really young and online user base, a demographic that tends to vote at lower rates than older eligible voters. Snap integrated an in-app polling location lookup in Snap Map, and also voter registration pop-up in the app in the lead up to election day to meet their users where they were at and totally demystify the registration and voting process for them. Snapchat was able to generate over 400,000 voter registration applications through the app by doing this. Of those, 57% were submitted by users between the ages of 18 to 24. And the polling location lookup on Snap Map was used by over 1.4 million Snapchatters. So it's just really important to meet your consumers or employees where they're at and figure out where your normal communication channels are, and then integrate get out the vote initiatives into those channels. So there's tons of ways to get involved, and companies can engage at any level they're comfortable with. And happy to share around this ladder of engagement with anybody who's interested in looking more at it after this webinar.
Excellent. And I definitely will say that the Harvard report is definitely required reading. But for those that haven't yet read it, could you share kind of the 5 key takeaways from the report?
Yeah, so here are all the takeaways listed together. I've already touched on a few of these. Companies believe that these initiatives are good for business, as we've discussed. Another takeaway is that leadership and staff support are critical in these programs, but money is not. Many of our case study participants ran their programs out of random departments led by employees in marketing or communications or government relations who are simply just super excited to help with these programs as a side project. There are plenty of ways to get creative and help celebrate and educate voters without having to direct large-scale resources towards your efforts. You just need support early on from key stakeholders at the company. Another one is, we've already discussed this, some effort is better than no effort. The next one is success comes from staying nonpartisan, prioritizing and celebrating the act of voting rather than a particular party, candidate, or issue. And then the last key takeaway that we have not touched on is that companies benefit greatly from leaning on nonprofit organizations and local elected officials. There's a whole suite of nonprofits and initiatives led by civic engagement experts who are here to help companies engage in initiatives in the most effective and impactful way possible. Just to name a few, there's the Civic Alliance, which is an alliance that provides businesses a full suite of resources to encourage their consumers and employees to get out the vote. There's National Voter Registration Day, as we've discussed, a national holiday celebrating democracy and encouraging voter registration. That's going to be on September 22nd. And then there's Vote Early Day, which we actually have a slide on later in this presentation. But this is a new coalition. It's a collaboration among media companies, nonprofits, technology platforms, election administrators, and other businesses to help eligible voters learn about their early voting options and celebrate the act of voting early. It's modeled after National Voter Registration Day. It's going to be on October 24th. To act as a stepping stone in the lead up to Election Day and to provide alternative assistance to voters in the expanding and quite confusing early voting space. These, among many others, are all groups that companies can sign on to as partners or just utilize their services to help your audience cast their ballots. And we found that working with these partners is crucial to ensuring success in corporate programming.
I think if we could take like a big step back, one of the big strategic objectives here is really just helping your audience to vote. This past week, I had conversations with an insurance company and an energy company that uses phone to action. And both of those organizations are looking at doing this type of civic engagement through their CSR program, their corporate social responsibility program. And they're looking at it through an education lens. And what this insurance company and what this energy company were looking at doing was providing purely objective information to help their employees and, in one case, their customers also vote. Objective information such as all of the upcoming election dates based on where they live and the registration deadlines, showing a full list of the candidates that are running where they live and the information on their polling places, as well as just general information about the process to get registered and the process to find information about voting early or absentee for those individuals that are motivated to do so. As we've mentioned, we have early vote day coming up on October 24th, and there was also an initiative that was launched a few years ago called Time to Vote, which is allowing organizations to essentially gift time for their employees to vote. So Patagonia closed all of their stores for the 2016 election. They decided to do so again in the 2018 election. Their CEO said that our democracy simply works better when people go vote, and that demonstrating your company's commitment to voting reinforces the idea that American businesses can protect our democracy. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is a list of CEOs across industry, from disruptors like Lyft to brick and mortars like Walmart, who had joined Patagonia to allow their employees to have time off to vote. I could speak personally that Phone to Action provides a civic engagement day that if any employee wants to go out and knock on doors, volunteer at the local soup kitchen, or take time to make sure that we have the opportunities to vote, Phone to Action provides us that opportunity as a civic engagement day that doesn't count towards our PTO. And I remember when I started my first job 16 years ago in the tech industry, the company that I was working for allowed employees to show up at work 2 hours late or leave 2 hours early on election day to make sure that we all had the chance and a time to vote. And I will say every single one of the employees at that tech company wore the I voted sticker on that day. So whether people are voting on election day or before election day, making sure it's part of your culture, giving that time off is certainly important. I'll talk a little bit about the Vote Early Day program, which was recently announced. You can learn more about it at voteearlyday.org. There's over 400 organizations that have been part of Time to Vote and 65 that signed up on day one as premier partners for Vote Early Day. We're looking for more partners to join in to provide resources to your employees, your board, your stakeholders, your business partners about how you too can promote the idea of voting early. And just a cross-section of different organizations, Ben & Jerry's, BET, BuzzFeed, Levi Strauss, MTV, NAACP, PayPal, Poder Latinx, REI, Twitter, Univision, USA Today, Unidos US, and a handful of others are already involved with this. So go to voteearlyday.org as soon as this webinar ends to learn more and sign up as a partner. As we're getting close to time, I wanted to make sure we have ample time for Q&A. But Dan, can you talk a little bit about the idea of who actually owns civic engagement within your organization and how the idea of having ownership within your organization is important?
Yeah, it's probably to take a step back just to tell you like how we're structured a little bit to kind of show you why it falls within there. So government relations and regional public affairs, as well as communications, are all in one department. So that's typically the buckets that we put civic engagement in, from anywhere from a local perspective to a federal perspective, and then also from internal and external communications. So we actually have a small working group across those units to make sure we're capturing all the communications channels and opportunities to promote civic engagement at the company. So we've got somebody from internal, external, and then we also have, I'm the representative from government affairs, but we also have a representative from regional public affairs on the committee as well, and regional communications. And we work together as a team to really look for those key opportunities that we can push out useful information that's going to make an impact and get to our employees.
And Danielle, do you want to speak about how it's organized at Caterpillar?
Sure. I think we're somewhat similar to Dan's team in that my group leads the Get Out the Vote efforts, and we're part of Global Government and Corporate Affairs is our technical business unit name. So we have corporate communications as part of our business unit. So this is an excellent opportunity for me to partner with my communications teammates that really own all of the corporate communications, so all of the facility and business unit communicators are kind of tied in through our corporate comms team. And we really utilize that group and the newsletters that they have and their digital screens in their facilities and all of that to push out our content. So this is a nice opportunity for partnership. I know some of you have probably had similar situations where if you're in charge of the political program, sometimes it's hard to find your footing, or it's hard to find really a champion within the communications team, or sometimes it's just a natural kind of headbutting because they own communications, so they're very particular about when you can communicate, how many messages you can send, especially on the PAC side. I find that this is sometimes true, but Get Out the Vote is a great opportunity for us to work together and really partner. And again, for me to utilize that network that they've built through the whole enterprise for me to get that communications out. I've also found that Get Out the Vote, though my team owns it, is a great opportunity for me to reach out and communicate with our diversity and inclusion groups, and specifically our ERGs, which I'm guessing they are called something similar at most of our companies. So we worked specifically with the Armed Services team on a series of Get Out the Vote speaker events during the last during the last two big elections. We worked with those teams and we brought in a veteran of the Iraq War, and we had him speak at some of our facilities and kind of give a Get Out the Vote presentation that was also kind of Americana. It was just all these wonderful things kind of tied in together. And the Armed Services team helped us, again, build kind of a full day of activities at some of our facilities around this Get Out the Vote effort and this speaker. And again, sometimes even a picnic. And we unveiled a wall of all the people who had served in the military at one of our facilities. So it's just a great opportunity to maybe reach out to some non-traditional groups, maybe that you don't always work with in your government affairs activities, and bring them in and establish that relationship and that trust so that you can work together on other things, which I find I'm often having to do now as the PAC gets into more social stuff. So I would definitely encourage that sort of outreach through your Get Out the Vote. Even though your team owns it, it gives you an awesome opportunity to reach into different teams.
Yep, I would just dovetail on what Danielle was saying. We also partner with our employee resource groups, across the firm, and promoting, civic engagement and Get Out the Vote efforts. What we do is we try to highlight kind of key employees from each of their groups and why voting is important to them. Not talking about issue specific, but we had a veteran talk about what it means to vote. We had, the head of our departments never missed an election. We also had, a new nationalized citizen who was voting for the first time. So you can do it in a nonpartisan way and still weave in some personalized stories about why voting is important.
And Juliet, we had some examples of partnering internally. Could you share a little bit about partnering externally with maybe a social impact firm like yourself, or partnering with a trade association or a local NGO?
Yeah, sure. So there's always the option of hiring a firm such as Impactful. We help companies that really want to dig in on a civic engagement plan to deep dive into their brand, their reach, their goals, and develop a long-term strategy and implementation timeline. I do want to make clear, though, that even in this situation, companies are the driving force behind this initiative, and we work with teams that are across a whole various departments: government relations, marketing, communications, diversity and inclusion, and they are really the driving force behind the campaign, even if they are working with us on it. We're just there to facilitate and help with the strategy and the implementation, and to ensure that it is truly impactful. Yeah.
And I would just encourage you, as Danielle shared as well, look at the trade associations in your vertical, see if there are opportunities to partner, as Caterpillar does with NAM and AEM, to work together. as well as local community groups that are providing voter opportunity engagements as well. Let's talk a little bit about who we are actually speaking with. A lot of the conversation today has been about employers speaking with employees, but different organizations, whether you're B2B, B2C, B2B2C, you have different types of audiences that you could work with. Juliet, could you talk a little bit about voice and how you're structuring messages with your clients based on the audience that they're looking at engaging?
Sure. So it's really important to know who your audience is and what your normal channels of communications are with them, and that's how to effectively engage them. So there are employees, which we've already talked about quite a lot. There's consumers, and then there's stakeholders, partners, fans, etc. So the question is, who do you regularly communicate with, and who do you have the ability to engage in programming around Get Up a Vote? So we saw our case study participants focus on who they thought they could best reach with their messaging. WME sent out emails with election information and reminders from HR to employees. But then also from the consumer point of view, hosted a huge party at the polls with Sheryl Crow headlining. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota has a large and very engaged employee base, so it hosts informational voting events in their offices with elected officials, candidates from all parties, etc. And then there's Snapchat and Twitter, which has a vast online consumer base that they communicate with on a daily basis. So they activated their consumers through their platforms through things I've already discussed, such as the in-app polling location lookup on Snap Map, the voter registration pop-up, Twitter verified politicians' accounts, and promoted different hashtags saying, I voted, stuff like that. So it's really just, it totally depends on who you think you have the ability to engage with this work and where this engagement will have the most widespread and meaningful impact.
And I know a few of the other Phone to Action partners that we work with also include state and local officials as part of their audience because they're looking at building relationships and they want to bring in those local officials and federal officials to have discussions with their employees so their employees can educate those state, local, and federal officials about the impact that they make in their local communities. And I know NAM and others do things like the How Things Are Made program, where they're educating, how a tractor is made at Caterpillar and what the impact of that tractor is for the broader economy. We've got a few minutes left, so before we transition over to the Q&A session, I just wanted to also share that Phone to Action wants to be your partner with your civic engagement, whatever your goals are for 2020. Our Civic Action Center tools were originally launched in 2016. They were updated again for the 2018 midterm elections, updated for the 2019 off-year elections last year for those states that had elections. And we have a brand new template that went out before Super Tuesday for the 2020 elections. The template is available in English and Latin American Spanish, as well as all of our communication tools are fully baked into the Civic Action Center. So if anybody wants to take out their mobile phone right now and text "Vote Early," no spaces, to 52886, you can see how the text messaging tools work to engage an audience and push people to a Civic Action Center where you can go in and check if you're registered, register online or paper, see candidates, find your elected officials, and learn about the upcoming elections based on where you live. With that, I wanted to thank everyone for coming today. I know these are definitely trying times, but we appreciate you spending the hour with us to talk about voter engagement and civic engagement. You can learn more about Phone to Action and our civic engagement tools at phonetoaction.com/GOTV by calling our phone number that you see on the screen or at the Phone to Action website, or just emailing me. We'd be happy to have conversations beyond civic engagement of how we could help you. We've had a number of conversations over the last 2 weeks about organizations looking at changing their annual DC fly-ins or state capitol fly-ins into virtual fly-ins. So we're very happy to have conversations with you, whether you're an existing partner or just a member of the industry, how we could be a resource for you. Let's look quickly at what questions came in. And as a reminder, you can type questions directly into the GoToWebinar software on the chat side. there's a questions box, and we'd be happy to take questions. I see one in here right now, and perhaps a question for either Danielle or Dan. How do you measure success within your civic engagement program?
Mr. O'Brien, you want to go first?
Sure. You know, well, first off, you know, our program success is to try to reach as many of our employees as possible that are eligible to vote. So we use as many channels, both you know, communications channels, in-person events, or you know, direct outreach as we have possible. What we've done in terms of trying to measure our program, and that went back to 2018, was to use the metrics that our communications group uses in terms of how many people have either accessed our GOTV site, how many people have reviewed candidates, and we look at it in different buckets in terms of, you know, where our measurables are from a communication standpoint and reaching our folks. So we don't track anything beyond that. And then we do a few, you know, voluntary polls on our internal site, but those are kind of the things that we keep those consistent throughout, so we can look back to see when people are actually engaged.
Great.
We're somewhat similar at CAT in that we're trying to follow kind of what our numbers are after we push out a reminder about a voter registration deadline. We're looking at those metrics on the back end of our Phone to Action website to see how many people kind of took us up on that. We used to track the number of people at our events and that sort of thing. We don't necessarily track them by person. We just do it more holistically, like this many people came to the table that we had set up in our logistics facility in Clayton, Ohio, and they logged on to the state secretary of, the Secretary of State's website in Ohio to update their voter registration or register to vote for the first time. So we did things like that. But I would say this year, that's a lot of our focus, is to try to be a little more sophisticated in that tracking and in those metrics. It's somewhere we've lagged behind because, again, we really started this just as an employee benefit or good corporate citizen activity. But as the whole of our government affairs team is having to track more on the metric side and show value and really justify what we do, of course, that has come down and kind of infiltrated our Get Out the Vote programs too. And so we're having to find other ways to track. And so the metrics, a lot of those will be the things that we have there on our Phone to Action site. And again, a lot of those activities that we do, hopefully in person with our trade associations.
Yeah, I'll just give like one concrete example, for us, just for in 2018, in the midterm elections, we did a kickoff video with both our head of federal and head of regional government relations, and did an article about the program. And then we did the similar thing to kick off the program this year. So we were able to kind of compare the two and match them up based on how many views of the video there were, how many comments were made. We have a like feature similar to other social media platforms on our internal site, but then also track in bulk, as Danielle stated, how many people went to the Get Out the Vote site and, actually took some type of action, whether that was, registered, check their registration, viewed who the candidates were, find their polling location, and just do like aggregate numbers from that perspective.
Excellent. Well, I want to be respectful for everyone's time. I have that we had an hour. It's 1:30 now. So if anybody has any additional follow-up questions or questions that you wanted to ask offline, just shoot me an email, jlangsner@phonetoaction.com, or call us at Phone to Action, and we'd be happy to have a conversation to see how we could be a partner to help you reach your civic engagement goals for 2020. Wanted to thank all of our wonderful speakers for joining us today and sharing their best practices, their wisdom, and wanted to again thank everyone for calling in and attending today's webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and the slides and recording can be made available to anybody that participated. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and good luck engaging your employees in 2020.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.